Hello and welcome to the NBA Outlet Playoff Preview Series presented by OTGBasketball.com. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, Jac Manuell and Mason Cheng. What's up, fellas?
What's up?
Howdy, lads.
We are talking Rockets and Timberwolves today. You know, that was a great game between the Timberwolves and Nuggets. Overtime, you saw Towns and Jokic go at it. They got themselves in the playoffs, and lucky them, they get a matchup with the Rockets in the first round. And this is a team that swept them in the regular season. But what can we take away from what we've seen from the Rockets and the Timberwolves this year?
So I think the Timberwolves have had the most disappointing season based on like preseason like predictions and stuff, because I expected them to be like easily in the top 3 this year. But you know, like they haven't lived up to expectations. That's mostly because like they haven't really been gelling, and like the Western Conference is so tough. But in their matchups against the Rockets, like they took all 4 losses, unfortunately. But I think this series is definitely going to be a lot more competitive.
Yeah, piggybacking off Mason's point there, Jimmy Butler was only in one of those matchups, really. So I feel like you can only look at it, you can take it with a grain of salt. And also the injury to Luka Mbah-a-Moute is going to be huge going forward in terms of the Rockets' ability to sort of play that they want to play at their top level in terms of offense and defense. So it's certainly going to be a lot more competitive, like Mason mentioned.
And then obviously Towns being his first time in the postseason, you can probably expect something really great from him after we saw last night against the Nuggets. He really stepped his game up. And even Wiggins in that game, you saw a little bit of hustle from him, and that could be important. But where do you think the Rockets can attack the Timberwolves in this series?
I think the Rockets, their best bet, and this is really surprising because if like all my friends know, I do not like Ryan Anderson at all. Like, I think he's a great person, but I think his contract's one of the worst in the NBA. But I think, like, in terms of, like, matchups and, like, how they attack the Timberwolves, I think keeping Ryan Anderson in the game is actually their best bet because the Timberwolves' best post defender is Taj Gibson. And, like, statistics-wise, he's, like, using advanced metrics, he's, like, been their best post defender all season. The only problem is Ryan Anderson doesn't, like, if he's on Ryan Anderson, he has to go out of the paint. And Ryan Anderson dragged him to the 3-point line, so the paint's now clear. And now, like, the only paint defender is Karl-Anthony Towns, who gets a lot of blocks, but he's also like, other than like the big stat of blocks, he's not really that great of a defender because he's actually allowing a lot more points per 100 possessions than their defensive rating.
Yeah, so, he's out of position a lot too. Like you mentioned, he's a great shot blocker, but he just seems to get confused a lot defensively.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is actually because he's not very quick laterally. So like whenever he gets switched onto a guard, it's sort of like if he gets put on an island, the guard's going to get by him pretty easily. And also I think he also stat pads a little bit in the sense that like he chases down blocks, so he lets people get past him just a little bit so he can get the block sometimes. And that's, especially in a playoff atmosphere, that's going to be detrimental. So I guess like the way the Rockets should attack the Timberwolves is like having like a floor spacer at the 4 spot and dragging Taj Gibson to the 3-point line. And this is most effective when Ryan Anderson is in the game.
Yeah, you make a good point. I don't think many people would have thought of that, Mason. Being able to, I mean, they stretched the floor so tremendously already. They made 1,256 threes for the year. Almost solid number that. Almost 41% of their shots come from that area. Their bench, their net rating. Their ISO ball as well. We've all talked about James Harden and Chris Paul to death, but I feel like that's one area where in the playoffs that will become even more of a weapon for them. In the pick and roll as well, Clint Capella, we're talking about how Karl-Anthony Towns struggles a little bit defensively, laterally, but yeah, especially when it comes to hedging, I feel like you can't hedge against a guy like Clint Capella who has supreme verticality. So there's a lot of ways that the Rockets can attack them in lots of different ways. And I feel like, Mason brought up a point that not many people would have thought of.
Yeah, I agree. I think Ryan Anderson could be a big factor in the series. And then the fact attacking Towns, not only in the sense of his lack of defense, which he could step up in the playoffs, but fouls have been an issue for him at points. Like you mentioned, Mason, he chases blocks, get him in foul trouble. That could be a big factor for the Timberwolves losing him on the offensive end.
Yeah, and I guess like to illustrate how important he is, like offensively and defensively for the Timberwolves, like especially against the Rockets, like even though like he's not that great laterally, like in their 4 matchups against the Rockets, Clint Capella has been like really like kept in line by Karl-Anthony Towns. Like I looked up the advanced metrics like for like his net differential, and it's actually the worst out of all rotational players on the team for the Rockets. It's at
Interesting.
yeah, it's at a 3.7 net rating, which is, I mean, 3.7 is still good because it's, you know, positive, but it makes sense because like when Towns is in the game, Clint Capella can't really catch alley oops because Towns is taller because he's, you know, Towns is actually 7 feet tall while Clint Capella is only 6'10". And there's a lot of things that like Towns can do that interrupts the pick and roll like system that Houston sort of runs with Clint Capella. So like, you know, again, and this is also like this also could be like Taj Gibson getting into it, like or something like that, because like also in these games Ryan Anderson hasn't played a lot of minutes, so there's also that factor that we have to, you know, take into consideration. But like, yeah, I think if Towns gets into foul trouble at least 4 of those games, that's going to be 4 games that the Rockets win.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, just pulling them away. And obviously, Houston's been amazing. Like Jack mentioned, knocking down threes all season long from all different positions. And they can kind of pull some of these post defenders and these guys who like to stay in the paint in the Timberwolves and just really attack them. Where can the Timberwolves attack the Rockets?
This is sort of like where Ryan Anderson becomes a double-edged sword. They can attack him on defense because, or like offensively, they can attack Ryan Anderson because Ryan Anderson is not a good defender. But other than that, like there's also James Harden. If James Harden takes any sort of like offensive pressure from Jimmy Butler or Jeff Teague, it's going to be easy or relatively easier buckets for the Timberwolves, because like although Harden's defense has improved this season against the Timberwolves, he has the 3rd worst net differential among players that have more than 15 minutes per game. So it's pretty interesting.
It definitely is, and I feel like they can also exploit them in the paint. I feel like, you know, they're 4th in offensive rebound percentage and 4th in points in the paint, with almost 45% of their shots coming from there. So if they can sort of, you know, be an antithesis to what the Rockets are doing, yes, they're going to need to make their threes when they're open, but also I feel like the absence of Luka Mute could allow someone like a Wiggins or a Butler to flourish, you know, because, you know, you can only guard so many players. You know, Wiggins had a nice game against the Denver Nuggets. His season has been certainly up and down, but, you know, we know he can score. He's got that sort of juice on that end. We know that Karl-Anthony Towns is supreme in his offensive versatility. So if they play through him a little bit, you know, get Clint Capella maybe in some foul trouble, see what they can do over there. And Jimmy Butler is just, he's going to be lights out. He's going to be so amped up for this series. Playoff Jimmy's going to be another beast to deal with. But yeah, if they could sort of, the clashing styles is going to be one to watch, and whoever gets the game on their style is going to go a long way to getting the W. But I feel like the Rockets just have too much versatility, offensive and defensively.
Yeah. And I sort of like I want to jump into the point where you talk that you made about specifically like their points in the paint. I sort of want to provide a counter to that. I think the Timberwolves should actually sort of expand their range to the 3-point line a bit. And the reason why is because like looking at these games, it seems like they can't stop the Rockets offensively. So maybe the best way to beat the Rockets is to play at the Rockets' pace. And I know this is sort of like sort of controversial for the Timberwolves to do that because they haven't been able to do this all season. But like against the Cavs, when they scored over 130 points against the Cavs, that I think that's when they sort of showed like we can possibly keep up with a team like the Rockets or the Warriors. And they actually certainly have great 3-point shooters. It's just they, for some reason, I mean, I blame Tom Thibodeau for this. They sort of choose not to shoot threes, even though sometimes they're wide open at the 3-point line.
Yeah, I mean, some of it also does with rotations where they kind of put out where Tibbs puts out a lineup that doesn't really have great spacing, where it kind of puts guys in a situation like when you have Derrick Rose sitting in the corner to shoot a 3, it's not really helping anybody because not many are going to respect that. So it's definitely like it's a decision for them. You know, they could try to match up with the Rockets in terms of pace and go for that high scoring game because they do have some really gifted offensive players, or they can try to go in the opposite direction and kind of really slow the game down, try to bang on the boards a little bit, take advantage of guys in the paint. So it's like depending on which way Tibbs is going to go. So I think one thing, if I'm the Timberwolves, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make somebody else make a play other than Chris Paul and James Harden. You know, we know Chris
Yeah.
Paul, we know James Harden. They're killing it in ISO. They're killing it in pick and roll. I'm trying to make somebody else like a PJ Tucker make a play, Ryan Anderson make a play like for himself. If I can do that, I'm hurting that offense, slowing down the game a little bit. But it's hard to do, especially when they have CP3 and James Harden.
Yeah, and I guess like to like jump on that point that you just made. You saw against the game, like the Rockets versus when the Rockets played the Thunder last, when the last couple possessions in the fourth quarter, Russell Westbrook was hammering James Harden and getting the ball out of his hands. And and if you look at the team, like the reason like why they have to do that is because like Chris Paul doesn't really like all season long, he doesn't 100% fit in the Rockets system. And like I know that it's sort of like his numbers speak like show otherwise, like because he's still scoring like almost 20 points a game with like 8 assists. He doesn't look comfortable, and a lot of the times when he runs the offense, like even when James Harden is on the court, it devolves into ISO ball, and he throws up a mid-range 2 or a 3 that's very well contested, and a lot of times that goes in, and that works for us. But like at the same time,
Not a great shot.
yeah, it's not a great shot, and in the playoffs, especially against length, like if Jimmy Butler's guarding Chris Paul or Jeff Teague, who's actually a pretty long athlete, or maybe even Karl-Anthony Towns or Andrew Wiggins, like it's gonna be very detrimental for the Rockets to do that. So like I think like getting the ball out of James Harden's hands is the perfect sort of counter that the Timberwolves can use against them.
And Jimmy Butler might be one of the guys in the league that's capable of doing that. Not saying he will, but he's definitely one of the top perimeter defenders when he's locked in, especially with the toughness he plays with. Key matchups in the series.
We just harped on it then. Harden and Butler, Teague and CP3, Cat and Capella. There's so many great matchups, and it's going to come down to who's going to have the most impact. Putting Harden in the pick and roll, similar to what a lot of other teams do to Steph Curry, is one thing that I feel like the Timberwolves really need to do. Keep harping on him in the pick and roll. Keep making him defend the pick and roll, because that's going to not only tire him out on both ends of the floor, but it'll also allow Butler to get his own. It'll allow Wiggins to get his own. But there's so many great matchups that this is going to be a series, despite the fact that, it's the 1 versus the 8. I feel like it's going to be quite competitive.
Yeah, and also another key matchup that we sort of haven't mentioned at all, Nene versus Gorgie Jang. I think because Gorgie Jang is by far the worst player in the Timberwolves rotation in terms of defense. He's a negative 40.3 net rating, which is atrocious against the Rockets. This is only against the Rockets, and he's for some reason he's played around 20 minutes per game, and that's quite a bit, especially like when you consider like if he's negative 40.3.
He's doing something wrong.
Yeah, and that's like for 20 minutes a game. That's definitely going to harm them in the long run. So like if the Timberwolves bench defense, specifically Gorgie Jang, can step it up against Nene, then like this would I think this would keep the games extremely close.
Yeah, bench will be a big thing. And Nene was great last year against OKC, and then he got hurt against the Spurs series. So I think that is a nice matchup to keep an eye on. I think in general, just the Timberwolves bench. They've been underperforming all year. Tibbs has definitely not gone to his bench when he's needed to. And Houston, on the other hand, D'Antoni's open to playing a lot of guys, and they have a lot of guys on that bench that can attack you and actually get you some points. Like Gerald Green's the type of guy that can just randomly have a good game.
Yeah. And like actually there's actually another like matchup. Speaking of Gerald Green, like because Gerald Green is now replacing Luke Ricard, Mbah Moute. So like when you have like Green like in the game in place of him, I think Green and Jamal Crawford would be extremely interesting as well.
Yeah. Both guys can get super hot, and they're kind of like they also can be super bad in the sense too. So, but deciding factor for the series, what's going to be the deciding factor here?
I think 3-point shooting. I think if the Timberwolves stop the Rockets from shooting threes, and I think if they can hit at least 50% of their shots from the field, which is what the Rockets have been doing against the Timberwolves this season. Their most successful game was on March 18th, and that was a 129-120 victory loss without Butler. And in that game, they really kept it close, so they kept their field goal percentage up, but they couldn't stop the Rockets. So I think like if they keep it close, but somehow stop the Rockets shooting, I think that would be the deciding factor of this.
Yeah, I'm going to go with James Harden. The whole storyline around him, he's been dominant this regular season, but can he start to shed some of those playoff demons that we saw against the Spurs? I feel like it starts here, and I feel like he's going to be making a name for himself. I feel like Chris Paul, his running mate, is going to. It's underrated how good Chris Paul has been in the playoffs, despite the fact that he hasn't made a finals. But yeah, I feel like James Harden needs to start to really make an impact, really make his voice felt. And I feel like if he can do that, and they can get offensively good early. I feel like D'Antoni's rotations are certainly going to shrink. We know he likes to do that. And that can be to his own detriment sometimes, but he now has the depth to go to guys like Mason was mentioned, like Gerald Green, Nene, especially in the absence of Luke Bouchard and Bar Mute. So I feel like Harden needs to dominate early, and that's going to go a long way to deciding the series.
And I think Harden dominating the series could have a positive impact for the rest of the playoffs as well. Like you said, Jack, obviously that confidence. And I think an underrated factor of CP3 is he's kind of like a cheerleader for James Harden. You always see him, clapping him up, telling him he did a great job on, when he has those big games. He's also a guy in his ear letting him know, like, you need to attack. Because James Harden isn't necessarily the leader at all times, especially that vocal guy. We know Chris Paul can be that guy. So he'll let James Harden know. He also has plenty of experience. Like you said, Jack, in the playoffs, he's had good moments. It's not like everything is bad. He'll let Harden know what to do here and there. And then also the luxury of maybe if James Harden is getting a ton of attention. I know Mason mentioned Chris Paul hasn't been amazing in the system fit, but he has hit a lot of tough shots. He's still that guy in the playoffs that's been there, and he'll make big plays because for Chris Paul, this is one of his last opportunities to make a deep playoff run too. So I think, overall the confidence of those guys, and I'm pretty high in the Rockets in the series, so I'm thinking health is just a major concern. If they stay healthy in the series, they should win the series.
Yeah, and about your point with about Chris Paul, even at his worst, he's still better than Eric Gordon leading the bench.
Exactly.
Leading the bench. Because last year, I've been saying this since Eric Gordon was on the Clippers. He's not a guard that can lead an offense. He doesn't
score.
Yeah, he doesn't look comfortable sort of making passes and running a pick and roll and stuff. So it's great to have Chris Paul in the lineup at least when Harden's sitting. So we have that going for us, I guess.
Exactly. And it's a luxury. Chris Paul is one of the all-time great point guards. Having him on your team with possibly another all-time great player in James Harden, good things should happen. Predictions for the series. What's your final thoughts? Who's going to win and how many games?
I say Rockets in 5 or 7 games, or 5 to 7 games. I think that the Timberwolves can actually extend this to a 7-game series based on because we haven't seen this Timberwolves team, with Butler, with everything clicking at all against the Rockets this year. So even though they took 4 losses earlier in the regular season, this is still a different Timberwolves team because they sort of evolved since the last matchup.
Yeah, they certainly have. I'm going to go Rockets in 5. For me, this is the most one-sided series, but in saying that, there's still elements that could make it super competitive in terms of health and just to how each team sort of matches up with each other. But in saying that, the Rockets have been too good in the regular season not to win this, and win this relatively comfortably.
Honestly, and I feel like the Timberwolves might be a little fatigued going into the series. Just think about all the minutes. I know Towns isn't an old player or anything, but he's logged a ton of minutes at his size this year. Wiggins has logged a ton of minutes. Butler, when he was healthy, logged a ton of minutes. I'm liking the Rockets in 5. I wouldn't be surprised if a little bit longer, and I also wouldn't be surprised if those games are all competitive and the Rockets just pull it out because they have Chris Paul and James Harden, where the lack of playoff experience may hurt the Timberwolves in this situation. Obviously, Butler's been there before. Towns, Wiggins, not so much. MVP of the series. Who's your MVP?
I would say if the Timberwolves win, it would be Karl Anthony Towns. If the Rockets win, it'd probably be James Harden.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I feel like James Harden, as we mentioned about our deciding factor as well, he's going to be the MVP of the regular season, and it'd be very surprising to see him not dominate this T-Wolves team if he's getting the right support from players around him. And hopefully, Jimmy Butler, if he's, on and James Harden can somehow still dominate, then that's going to be a huge confidence booster going into the second round for him.
Yeah, it's tough. This is actually a tough one because I think, you want to go with James Harden, the MVP, but I just have this feeling that, the Timberwolves are really going to go after Harden and try to prevent him from winning the game. And Butler's just been one of those tough guys. Not saying he's locked down LeBron in the past, but he's done a very good job in the Eastern Conference playoffs. So give me Chris Paul for MVP. I think he's going to have some really big moments in the series.
Yeah, definitely. I think another another co-MVP would be the Rockets floor spacers, because I think
Yeah.
that would also be, you know, like that's the whole point of the offense. So like you should, I feel like we should probably give them some credit.
Yeah,
for,
we haven't even
if they win.
mentioned Trevor Ariza once on this, and that's terrible because he's a
Yeah.
solid role player in this league. But it's
Yeah.
just like the Rockets have so many good bench pieces and depth pieces and role players on that squad. It's hard to mention everybody. But Mason, Jack, thank you for hopping on. As always, thank you everybody for listening. You can catch the show on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, and Google Play. We're going to have a ton of playoff preview pods and a ton of playoff content on OTGBasketball.com.